The moment Lily Lancaster wore her dead husband's wool coat into the general store, the whispers started like rattlesnakes slithering through dry grass. It was March of 1883 in Taylorsville, Utah, and the spring wind still carried winter's bite through the valley, but apparently freezing to death was preferable to the scandal of a widow wearing men's clothing. Lily kept her chin up as she walked past the cluster of women near the fabric bolts, their faces twisted in expressions that mixed pity with disgust, but inside her chest, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Disgraceful, Mrs. Henderson muttered, loud enough to be heard. Thomas has barely been in the ground 3 months. Lily's fingers tightened on her shopping list, the paper crinkling in her grip. Thomas's coat hung heavy on her shoulders, the sleeves too long, the shoulders too broad, but it was warm, and it was all she had left besides threadbare dresses that did nothing against the cold that seeped into the small cabin she still called home. Her own winter coat had been sold 2 weeks after Thomas died, along with most everything else of value, just to pay the doctor's bills that had accumulated during his final illness. Consumption had taken him slowly, draining their savings as surely as it drained the life from his lungs. I need 2 pounds of flour, a half-pound of coffee, and whatever salt pork you can spare for 60 cents, Lily said to Mr. Pearson behind the counter, keeping her voice steady even as heat crept up her neck. Mr. Pearson's eyes flickered to the coat, then away. He was a decent man, had always been fair with her and Thomas, but even he seemed uncomfortable now. "I can do that, Mrs. Lancaster. Though I should mention that Mrs. Pearson has some sewing work if you're looking to earn a bit extra. Mending and such." It was kindly meant, Lily knew, but the implication stung. A proper widow would be taking in sewing, not wearing her dead husband's clothes, and managing a small homestead by herself. A proper widow would have already moved back east to live with family, would have sold the land and livestock, would have accepted her new station in life with appropriate feminine grace. "I appreciate that, Mr. Pearson, but I have the horses to tend and the spring planting coming up. Thomas's wheat fields need sowing in another few weeks." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut with a knife. The other women had stopped even pretending to shop and were openly staring now. Mrs. Henderson's daughter, a girl of about 19 with the same pinched expression as her mother, actually gasped. "You cannot possibly mean to work that land yourself," Mrs. Henderson said, stepping forward with her hands clasped at her waist like she was about to deliver a sermon. "My dear Mrs. Lancaster, you must see reason. A woman alone cannot possibly manage a farm. You should sell to Mr. Garrett, as he offered, and find proper employment in town. Or better yet, return to your people in Illinois." Lily turned to face the older woman fully, and for just a moment she let her exhaustion show. She had been up since before dawn, had fed and watered 6 horses, had mucked out stalls, had split enough kindling to last through the week, and had walked the 3 miles into town because she couldn't spare a horse for riding when they needed their strength for plowing. Her hands were raw and blistered, her back ached, and she had not had a full night's sleep since Thomas drew his last rattling breath on December 27th. "Mrs. Henderson, I appreciate your concern," Lily said, and she meant it despite everything. "But that land is all I have left of the life Thomas and I built together. I will not sell it for half what it is worth just because people find it unseemly that I wear his coat to keep from freezing." "It is not just the coat," Mrs. Henderson replied, though her tone had softened slightly. "You have been seen wearing his trousers as well, his work shirts. It is simply not decent, my dear. What will people think? You will ruin any chance you have of marrying again if you continue on this way." The laugh that escaped Lily's throat was bitter and sharp. "Marry again? I buried the only man I will ever love 3 months ago. I am not looking for a husband, Mrs. Henderson. I am looking to survive the spring and get the wheat planted so I can afford to survive the summer and harvest it in the fall. That is the extent of my ambitions at present." Mr. Pearson cleared his throat and pushed the wrapped parcels across the counter. "Your order, Mrs. Lancaster. I threw in an extra bit of salt pork." No charge. Lily's eyes burned suddenly with tears she refused to shed. Not here. Not in front of these women who were so quick to judge and so slow to help. Thank you. Mr. Pearson, that is very kind. She gathered her parcels and turned to leave, but Mrs. Henderson was not finished. You are being foolish and stubborn, and you will regret this course. A woman needs the protection and provision of a man. That is simply the natural order of things. Then the natural order can go hang, Lily said quietly, and walked out into the cold March wind before anyone could respond. The walk back to the homestead seemed longer than usual, weighed down as she was with both groceries and the heavy stone of other people's judgment. Lily pulled Thomas's coat tighter around herself and focused on putting one foot in front of the other on the rutted dirt road. The Wasatch Mountains rose up to the east, still capped with snow, their peaks sharp against the pale blue sky. Thomas had loved those mountains. He used to say they made him feel small in a good way, like his problems were not so insurmountable after all. But Thomas was gone, and Lily's problems felt very insurmountable indeed. The homestead came into view as she crested the small rise about a half-mile out. It was not much to look at, just a simple log cabin with a stone chimney, a small barn, a chicken coop, and about 40 acres of land that stretched toward the base of the foothills. Most of it was dedicated to wheat, which had sold well enough the past 2 years to give them hope that they might actually make a real go of it. Thomas had been so proud of that first harvest, had lifted Lily up and spun her around in the middle of the field while golden grain dust settled in her hair. Now the fields lay empty and waiting, and Lily had no idea how she was going to manage the plowing and planting alone. She was halfway across the yard when she heard the sound of hoofbeats on the road behind her. Lily turned, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and watched as a rider approached. He sat tall in the saddle, and as he drew closer, she could make out more details. He was probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that curled slightly beneath the brim of his hat and a strong jaw shadowed with a few days' worth of beard. He wore the practical clothing of someone who worked for a living: sturdy canvas trousers, a worn leather vest over a blue work shirt, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. The man slowed his horse as he approached, then stopped entirely when he reached her gate. "Afternoon, madam. I am looking for the Lancaster place. I was told I might find work here." Lily blinked in surprise. "You were told wrong, I am afraid. There is no work here. Mr. Lancaster passed away this winter." The man removed his hat, revealing more of his face, and Lily noticed his eyes were a striking gray blue, like storm clouds over the mountains. "I heard about that, madam, and I am sorry for your loss. But I also heard you might be needing help with spring planting. My name is Quinn Ingram. I have worked cattle ranches and farms all through Colorado and Wyoming, and I know my way around horses and field work both." "I cannot afford to hire anyone, Mr. Ingram. I barely have enough to feed myself through planting season." Quinn Ingram nodded slowly, as though he had expected this answer. "I would be willing to work for room and board and a small percentage of the harvest. I have got my own bedroll, and I do not eat much. I can sleep in the barn and stay out of your way." It was too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Lily regarded him with suspicion, shifting the parcels in her arms. "Why would you work for so little? You could find paid work at any of the larger ranches around here." "Because I am new to the area, and I do not have references anyone around here would know. Most ranches want to know your history before they will take you on. I figure if I can help you bring in a good harvest, that would give me something to show other potential employers come fall. Plus," he added, and something in his expression softened, "I think a person ought to be able to keep their land if they want to, regardless of what anyone else thinks about it." Lily's heart skipped a beat. "You have heard the gossip about me already." "I stopped at the boarding house in town to see about a room. Mrs. Patterson was more than happy to fill me in on all the local news while I ate lunch. She seems to think you are heading for ruin and disgrace, wearing men's clothing and refusing to sell your land like a sensible woman." Quinn Ingram's mouth quirked slightly. Not quite a smile, but something close. I told her I thought a person should wear whatever keeps them warm, and that holding on to your land sounded pretty sensible to me. Lily stared at him, this stranger who had ridden up out of nowhere with exactly the help she needed and words she had not realized she was desperate to hear. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to accept this unexpected gift from fate or providence or whatever power might be watching over struggling widows in Utah. But the practical part of her, the part that had learned to be cautious, held back. I do not know you, Mr. Ingram. For all I know, you could be a thief or worse. I cannot simply invite a strange man to live on my property. That is fair and smart, Quinn said. What if I work just today and tomorrow, and you can decide after that? I can sleep in town tonight and ride back out in the morning. That way you can see the quality of my work, and if you do not feel comfortable with the arrangement, I will ride on and no harm done. It was a reasonable compromise, and Lily found herself nodding before she had fully thought it through. All right, the barn needs mucking out, and the plow equipment needs to be checked over and repaired where necessary. If you can make good progress on those tasks, we can discuss the rest tomorrow evening. That sounds fair. Madam? Quinn dismounted in one fluid motion and led his horse toward the barn. I will get started right away. You just go about your business and do not mind me. Lily carried her parcels inside and set them on the rough wooden table Thomas had built their first year here. Through the small window, she could see Quinn Ingram leading his horse into the barn, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had spent most of his life working with animals. She should have felt nervous having a stranger on her property, but instead she felt something she had not experienced in months, a tiny flutter of hope. Over the next several hours, Lily tried to focus on her own tasks. She put away the groceries, fed the chickens, collected eggs, and started a simple stew for supper. But she found her gaze drifting to the barn repeatedly, watching Quinn as he worked. He moved with efficient purpose, carrying out bucket after bucket of soiled straw, spreading fresh bedding, checking the horse's hooves and teeth, speaking to them in low tones that seemed to calm even her most skittish mare. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, Quinn emerged from the barn and walked toward the cabin. He stopped a respectful distance from the door and called out, Mrs. Lancaster, I have finished with the barn for today. I will head back to town now, unless there is anything else you need. Lily stepped out onto the small porch, wiping her hands on her apron. The barn looked better than it had in weeks, and through the open door, she could see fresh straw gleaming golden in the late afternoon light. You have done a full day's work, Mr. Ingram. I cannot let you ride back to town without offering you supper first. Quinn hesitated. I do not want to impose. It is just stew and biscuits, nothing fancy, but you have earned it. She went back inside, leaving the door open in a gesture of hospitality, and Quinn followed after a moment, removing his hat and leaving his boots on the porch. Inside, the cabin was simple but clean, with a stone fireplace at one end, a rope bed in the corner, and a table with 2 chairs in the middle. Lily ladled stew into 2 wooden bowls and set out the biscuits she had made that morning. They ate in silence at first, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls and the crackle of the fire. Lily found herself studying him in quick glances. Up close, she could see that his hands were calloused and scarred from hard work, that his shirt had been mended in several places with careful stitches, that he ate with the focused attention of someone who had not always known where his next meal was coming from. This is very good, madam, Quinn said finally. Best meal I have had in weeks. You have been traveling for a while, then? About 2 months. I was working a ranch in Wyoming, but the owner sold out to a bigger outfit that brought in their own crew. So I have been moving south, looking for a place that feels right. He paused, then added, I am sorry about your husband. Mrs. Patterson said he was young still, that he got sick sudden-like. Lily's throat tightened. She had gotten better at holding back tears over the past months, but it still hurt every time someone mentioned Thomas. He was 27. We had been married for 4 years. The doctor said it was consumption, that there was nothing to be done except try to keep him comfortable. It took 3 months from diagnosis to... She could not finish the sentence. That is a hard way to lose someone, Quinn said quietly. Having to watch them fade like that. There was something in his tone that made Lily look up sharply. You sound like you speak from experience. My mother died of consumption when I was 16. I watched her waste away over the course of a year. By the end, she did not even look like herself anymore. Quinn stared down at his bowl. I am sorry. That was probably more than you wanted to know. No, I understand. People who have not been through it cannot really comprehend what it is like, the helplessness of it. Lily took a shaky breath. Thomas was so strong. He built this cabin with his own hands, broke the land, planted the fields, and then suddenly he was too weak to lift a cup of water. I had to watch him slip away piece by piece, and there was nothing I could do except be there. They sat in the growing darkness of the cabin, two near strangers bound together by the shared experience of watching someone they loved die slowly. Finally, Quinn spoke again. Is that why you are so determined to keep this place? Because he built it? Partly, but also because I do not have anywhere else to go. My parents died when I was young, and I was raised by an aunt who made it very clear I was a burden. When Thomas asked me to marry him and come west, it was like being handed a whole new life. We were going to build something here, together. A real home. Children eventually, maybe. We had plans. Her voice broke on the last word. I cannot just walk away from that. Even if he is gone, I need to finish what we started. Does that make any sense? More sense than anything else I have heard in a long time, Quinn said. He stood up and carried his bowl to the wash basin. Thank you for the meal, Mrs. Lancaster. I will be back at first light tomorrow if that suits you. That would be fine. And Mr. Ingram, thank you for the work today and for not thinking I am crazy for wanting to keep this place. Quinn settled his hat back on his head and paused in the doorway. You are not crazy. You are just stronger than most people would be in your situation. They do not know what to do with that, so they call it improper or unseemly or whatever other words make them feel more comfortable. But there is nothing wrong with being strong. He left before Lily could respond, swinging up into his saddle and riding off into the dusk. Lily stood on the porch long after the sound of hoofbeats had faded, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold, Thomas's coat heavy on her shoulders. Strong. When was the last time anyone had called her that? People called her stubborn, foolish, reckless, inappropriate, but not strong. She went back inside and lay down on the bed she had once shared with Thomas, pulling the quilts up to her chin. For the first time in months, she fell asleep without crying. Quinn Ingram rode back out to the homestead just as the sun was breaking over the Wasatch Mountains, painting the valley in shades of gold and rose. Lily was already up, dressed in Thomas's work trousers and one of his flannel shirts, gathering eggs from the chicken coop. She looked up at the sound of his approach and raised a hand in greeting. Good morning, Mr. Ingram. I have coffee on, if you would like some before you start work. I would appreciate that, madam. They drank their coffee on the porch in the cool morning air, watching as the sun climbed higher and the frost on the ground began to melt. Quinn noticed that Lily's hands trembled slightly as she held her cup. Whether from cold or exhaustion, he could not tell. Up close in the morning light, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the hollows in her cheeks that spoke of too many meals skipped or stretched too thin. I thought I would spend today going over your plow and wagon, make sure everything is in working order before planting starts, Quinn said. I noticed yesterday that one of your wagon wheels is looking pretty worn. Might need replacing before too long. Lily nodded. Thomas mentioned that last fall, but we never got around to it. I do not suppose I can afford to replace it now. I might be able to shore it up enough to get through the season. Cannot promise anything, but I will take a look. Quinn drained his coffee and stood. You need anything else done today? The fence on the north pasture has some posts that are leaning. If you have time after the plow work, I would be grateful if you could look at those. Consider it done. Quinn worked steadily through the day, and Lily found herself relaxing into the rhythm of having help again. She tended to her own tasks, baking bread and washing clothes and preparing the vegetable garden for planting, but it was easier knowing someone else was handling the heavier work. Several times she caught herself starting to call out to Thomas, forgetting for just a moment that he was gone, and each time the realization hit her like a fist to the chest. Around midday, Lily brought out bread and cheese and more coffee, and they ate sitting on overturned buckets near the barn. Quinn had removed his vest and rolled up his shirt sleeves, and Lily could see the play of muscles in his forearms as he worked. She looked away quickly, feeling guilty for noticing. I think I can get your plow in good working order, Quinn said between bites. And the wagon wheel can be reinforced. It will not be pretty, but it should hold. The fence posts are more of a problem. Several of them are rotted at the base and will need to be completely replaced. How much would that cost? Lily asked, though she already knew the answer would be more than she could afford. If you have got some good timber on your property, we could cut new posts ourselves. It would take time, but it would save you the cost of buying them. There is a stand of trees up near the foothills. Thomas always meant to thin them out anyway. Do you know how to fell trees safely? I do. Worked a logging camp one winter up in Montana. Worst job I ever had, but I learned the skills. Quinn glanced at her. Of course, if I am going to be doing all that work, it would make more sense for me to stay on rather than riding back and forth to town every day. But I understand if you are not comfortable with that yet. Lily considered this. She had watched Quinn work for 2 days now and had seen nothing that concerned her. He was respectful, kept his distance, did exactly what he said he would do. More importantly, she was starting to realize just how much work needed to be done before planting could begin, work she could not possibly accomplish alone. You can stay in the barn, she said finally. I will provide 3 meals a day, plus whatever percentage of the harvest we agreed on, but I will need you to check in with Sheriff Morrison in town and provide references, even if they are from out of state. I may be desperate for help, but I am not completely reckless. Quinn's expression relaxed into something that might have been relief. That is more than fair. I will ride into town this afternoon and talk to the sheriff. I worked for a man named Robert Chambers in Wyoming for 2 years, and before that, for the Triple Bar Ranch in Colorado for 3 years. They will vouch for my character and work ethic. Then we have an agreement, Mr. Ingram. Quinn, please, if I am going to be living here, even just in the barn, we can dispense with the formalities. All right, Quinn, and you may call me Lily. They shook hands on it, and Lily felt the calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip. It was the first time she had touched a man other than Thomas in years, and she pulled away quickly, unsettled by the warmth that lingered on her skin. Quinn rode into town that afternoon to speak with Sheriff Morrison, and Lily used the time alone to really think about what she was doing. Taking on a hired hand, even one working for almost nothing, was a risk. People were already talking about her. This would only fuel the gossip. But what choice did she have? She could sell the land for a fraction of what it was worth and end up destitute in a year anyway. Or she could fight to keep what was hers and endure the judgment of people whose opinions should not matter, but somehow still did. When Quinn returned several hours later, he was wearing a thoughtful expression. I talked to Sheriff Morrison. He sent telegrams to both ranches I mentioned. Should hear back within a few days. He seemed like a decent man. He is. He and Thomas were friendly. What else? Quinn dismounted and led his horse into the barn before answering. When he emerged, his face was carefully neutral. I stopped at the boarding house for lunch. Mrs. Patterson informed me that taking a job here would ruin my reputation, such as it is, and that I should reconsider before I become associated with a scandal. Lily's stomach dropped. I see. I told her I thought that was foolish, and that my reputation could survive being associated with a hard-working widow trying to keep her farm running. She was not pleased. Quinn's mouth quirked. I also stopped at the general store. Mr. Pearson mentioned that there is a dance this Saturday evening, a community gathering. He suggested that you might want to attend, make an appearance so people can see you are doing all right. I doubt attending a dance is going to improve people's opinions of me. Maybe not, but it might help to remind them that you are a real person, not just a subject for gossip. Quinn shrugged. Just a thought. It is none of my business either way. But the idea took root in Lily's mind over the next few days. She had been avoiding town as much as possible, making her trips for supplies as brief as she could manage. Maybe that was the wrong approach. Maybe she needed to face the gossip head on instead of hiding from it. The work on the homestead progressed quickly with Quinn's help. They cut and hauled new fence posts, repaired the plow, started preparing the fields for planting. Quinn moved into the barn, setting up his bedroll in the tack room and hanging his few possessions from nails in the wall. Lily cooked 3 solid meals a day, the first time she had bothered to do so since Thomas died, and they fell into an easy routine of working separately during the day and sharing supper in the evening. Lily found herself looking forward to those evening meals more than she should. Quinn was easy to talk to, with a dry sense of humor that occasionally caught her off guard and made her laugh. He told stories about his years working different ranches, about cattle drives gone wrong, and horses with personalities bigger than some people. She told him about growing up in Illinois, about meeting Thomas at a church social, about the leap of faith it had taken to marry him and move west. Did you ever regret it? Quinn asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Leaving everything you knew to come out here. Not once, Lily said immediately. Even now, even after everything, I do not regret it. I had 4 years with Thomas, 4 years of being truly happy. That is more than some people get in a lifetime. Quinn was quiet for a long moment. You must have loved him very much. I did, I still do. Lily looked down at her hands, at the simple gold band she still wore on her left hand. Does that ever go away? The loving someone even after they are gone? I do not know. I have never loved anyone like that. Quinn's voice was soft. Never stayed in one place long enough, I suppose. Always been easier to keep moving. Is that lonely? Sometimes, but it is also simpler. No one counting on you, no one to let down, just you and the road and whatever work you can find. He paused. I am 28 years old, and I do not have anything to show for it except a horse, a saddle, and the skills I learned along the way. Some people might call that a wasted life. I would not, Lily said firmly. You have your freedom, and you have helped people along the way. That matters. Maybe. Or maybe I have just been running from something I could not name. Quinn stood and stretched. I should turn in. We need to start the plowing tomorrow if we are going to get the wheat in on time. After he left, Lily sat alone in the darkness for a long time, thinking about freedom and loneliness and the different ways people survived in a hard world. Saturday came, and with it the decision about the dance. Lily stood in front of her small mirror, looking at herself in the one good dress she still owned, a simple dark blue calico that Thomas had always said brought out her eyes. She had not worn it since his funeral. Her reflection looked pale and too thin, her blonde hair pulled back in a severe bun, but at least she looked like a proper woman instead of someone masquerading in her dead husband's clothes. She was still working up the courage to actually go when she heard a knock at the door. Quinn stood on the porch, wearing what was clearly his best shirt, his hair damp from washing, his face freshly shaved. I thought you might like some company for the walk to town, he said, if you are still planning to go. Lily felt a surge of gratitude so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes. I am, thank you. They walked together in the cooling evening air, following the road toward the town center, where the community hall stood lit up with lanterns. Lily could hear music drifting from inside, fiddle and guitar, and the sound of voices raised in conversation and laughter. Her steps slowed as they approached. We do not have to go in if you do not want to, Quinn said quietly. No shame in changing your mind. But Lily shook her head. No, I am tired of hiding. I am tired of letting other people's opinions dictate how I live my life. She pushed open the door and stepped inside with Quinn at her shoulder. The music faltered for just a moment, and conversations died as people turned to look. Lily felt the weight of their stares, felt the judgment and speculation, but she kept her head high and walked further into the room. Sheriff Morrison was the first to approach, his weathered face breaking into a genuine smile. "Mrs. Lancaster, I am glad you came. And Mr. Ingram, I got those telegrams back from your former employers. They had nothing but good things to say about you." "I appreciate you checking, Sheriff," Quinn said. Mr. Pearson and his wife were next, offering polite greetings, and then a few others Lily knew from town. But the cluster of women that included Mrs. Henderson and her daughter remained pointedly distant, whispering behind their hands. The evening was awkward and uncomfortable, but Lily endured it. She made polite conversation, accepted condolences about Thomas, and tried to ignore the whispers that followed her around the room. Quinn stayed nearby, but not too close, talking with some of the ranchers and farmers, and Lily noticed how several young women cast interested glances his way. About halfway through the evening, a young cowboy named Billy Cooper, emboldened by whiskey, approached Lily with a mocking bow. "Mrs. Lancaster, might I have this dance, or would you prefer I fetch you a pair of trousers first?" The room went quiet. Lily felt her face flame with humiliation and anger, but before she could respond, Quinn was there, stepping smoothly between them. "I do not think the lady wants to dance with a drunk fool," Quinn said, his voice mild but his eyes hard. "Maybe you should head on home and sleep it off." Billy puffed up, his friends moving in behind him. "I do not take orders from some drifter who is living in a widow's barn. What kind of arrangement have you got there anyway?" "The kind where I do an honest day's work for honest pay," Quinn said. "Now move along before you embarrass yourself further." For a moment, Lily thought there might be a fight, but Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "That is enough, Billy. Time for you to leave." Billy and his friends slunk out, but the damage was done. The insinuation hung in the air like smoke, and Lily could see the calculation in people's eyes, the scandal growing in real time. A widow living alone with a strange man, even if he slept in the barn, even if the arrangement was perfectly innocent. It was the kind of thing small towns fed on. "I need some air," Lily said quietly, and fled outside before the tears could come. She made it around the side of the building before her composure broke, leaning against the rough wood wall and pressing her hands to her face. This was a mistake. Coming here was a mistake. All she had done was make everything worse. "Lily." Quinn's voice was gentle. He stood a few feet away, giving her space but making his presence known. "They are never going to let me forget," Lily said brokenly. "I am never going to be anything but an object of gossip and speculation. The scandalous widow who will not behave properly." "Then stop trying to behave properly," Quinn said. "Stop trying to fit yourself into the shape they want. You want to wear your late husband's coat because it is warm? Wear it. You want to run your own farm? Run it. You want to hire help and not give a damn what people say about your reputation? Then do not give a damn. It is not that simple." "Why not?" Quinn moved closer. "Lily, you are trying to please people who have already decided you are in the wrong. Nothing you do is going to change their minds, so you might as well do what feels right to you." Lily looked up at him, at his steady gray blue eyes and the certainty in his expression. "When did you become so wise?" "I am not wise. I just stopped caring what most people thought about me a long time ago. Makes life simpler." He held out his hand. "Come on, let me walk you home. We have got an early start tomorrow." They left without going back inside, walking through the quiet streets of Taylorsville and then out onto the open road. The stars were brilliant overhead. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like spilled milk. Lily breathed in the cool air and tried to let go of the shame and hurt from the evening. "Thank you," she said finally, "for standing up for me back there." Anyone would have done the same. No, they would not have. Most people would have let Billy say his piece and done nothing. Lily glanced at Quinn. You did not have to risk your own reputation defending mine. What reputation? I am a drifter who works for room and board. I do not have anything to lose. But there was something in Quinn's voice that suggested it mattered more than he was letting on. They walked in silence for a while, the homestead growing closer with each step. Finally, Lily gathered her courage and said what she had been thinking for days now. You do not have to sleep in the barn anymore. I trust you. You can have the cabin, and I will take the barn. Quinn stopped walking. Lily, I cannot let you do that. It is your home. The cabin has the fireplace and the bed. It is warmer and more comfortable. Please, Quinn, you have been working from dawn until dusk every day, sleeping on a bedroll in a drafty tack room. It is not right. And it is not right for you to give up your home for a hired hand. You are not just a hired hand anymore, Lily said quietly. You are a friend, maybe the only real friend I have right now. Please let me do this. Quinn looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his face. What if we split the difference? The cabin is big enough for 2 sleeping areas if we hang a blanket to divide the space. You keep your bed, I take a corner near the fire. That way we both stay warm, and no one gives up their space entirely. It was improper by any standard, a widow and a single man sharing living quarters, even divided ones. But Lily found she did not care anymore. Quinn was right. She was never going to satisfy the gossips no matter what she did, so she might as well do what made sense. All right, she agreed. We can try it. They rearranged the cabin that night, hanging a heavy quilt from the rafters to create 2 distinct spaces. Quinn set up his bedroll in the corner near the fireplace, and Lily kept her bed on the other side of the divider. It was strange at first, hearing someone else moving around in the cabin, but also comforting. She had been alone for so long. The planting started in earnest after that, long days of walking behind the plow while the horses strained against their harnesses, turning the earth row by row. Quinn handled the heavy work, but Lily walked behind sowing seed from a canvas bag slung over her shoulder, letting the wheat kernels fall into the fresh furrows. It was backbreaking labor, and Lily's hands blistered and her legs ached. But there was something deeply satisfying about it, too. This was her land, her wheat, her future taking root in the dark soil. They worked well together, developing an unspoken rhythm. Quinn was patient with the horses, firm but kind, and they responded to him with trust. During breaks, they would sit at the edge of the field and pass a water jug back and forth, too tired for much conversation, but comfortable in the shared silence. One afternoon, after they had been planting for nearly a week, Quinn asked, "Did you and Thomas farm together like this?" Lily wiped sweat from her forehead and nodded. "He did the plowing, and I did the sowing. We made a good team. Thomas used to sing while he worked, old hymns mostly. He had a terrible voice, but it made me laugh." "You do not laugh much anymore." "I suppose I have not had much to laugh about." Quinn considered this. "We should fix that. You cannot go through life without laughing. It will turn you bitter." "I am not bitter," Lily protested. "Not yet. But you could be, if you are not careful. Grief can do that, twist you up inside, until you forget what joy feels like." He stood and offered her a hand up. "Come on, let us finish this field before dark." But that evening, after supper, Quinn pulled out a harmonica from his pack and played a few simple tunes. He was not particularly skilled, and several notes came out more like squeaks than music, but there was something so endearing about his concentrated expression and the way his fingers fumbled over the holes that Lily found herself smiling despite everything. "You are terrible at that," she said, but there was no malice in it. "I know," Quinn agreed cheerfully. "But I am better than I was a year ago, and that is something. Besides, it fills the quiet. I bought this in a town in Colorado from a man who swore it would help me woo beautiful women. Turns out he was a liar and a cheat, but I kept the harmonica anyway." "Did you want to woo beautiful women?" "Not particularly. I was more interested in the harmonica." He played a few more notes, then stopped. Why, are you volunteering? Lily felt her cheeks heat. I am a widow in mourning. I should not even be thinking about such things. Says who? Some rule book about proper widow behavior? Quinn set the harmonica aside. Lily, you are allowed to feel things. You are allowed to move forward with your life. That does not mean you love Thomas any less. It has only been 3 months, Lily said, but her voice wavered. And it might be 3 years before you feel ready, or 30. There is no right timeline for grief, but you are also still alive, and living means feeling things, all kinds of things, even the ones that seem contradictory. Quinn stood and headed for his side of the divided cabin. Get some sleep. We've got another long day tomorrow. But Lily lay awake long after the fire had burned down to embers, thinking about grief and guilt and the unexpected comfort of Quinn's presence in her life. The weeks passed, spring deepening into early summer. The wheat sprouted, tender green shoots pushing up through the dark earth in neat rows that stretched towards the mountains. Lily checked the fields every morning, counting the plants, watching for signs of disease or pest damage. The crop looked good, better than it had any right to given everything that had happened. Quinn proved himself invaluable, not just with the farm work, but with the 100 small repairs and improvements that Thomas had always meant to get around to. He fixed the leak in the roof, replaced the broken step on the porch, built a better latch for the chicken coop to keep out predators. He worked steadily and without complaint, asking for nothing beyond what they had agreed upon. But Lily noticed other things too. The way Quinn always seemed to position himself between her and potential danger when they went to town for supplies. The way he saved the best portions of meat for her at meals, claiming he was not hungry when she knew he must be. The way he sometimes looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention, his expression soft and unguarded. And she noticed her own reactions to him, the way her heart beat faster when their hands accidentally brushed, the way she found herself taking more care with her appearance, braiding her hair instead of just pinning it back, washing her face in the basin every evening. The way she lay awake at night listening to the sound of his breathing on the other side of the quilt divider, feeling less alone than she had in months. It scared her, these feelings. They felt like a betrayal of Thomas, of the love they had shared. How could she be attracted to another man when her husband had been dead less than half a year? What kind of woman did that make her? She was wrestling with these thoughts one afternoon while weeding the vegetable garden when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. Lily straightened, shading her eyes, and saw 3 riders coming up the road. As they drew closer, she recognized the man in front, Robert Garrett, a wealthy rancher who owned most of the land to the north of her property. He had made an offer to buy her out shortly after Thomas died, an offer she had refused. Quinn emerged from the barn, and Lily felt a rush of relief at his presence. Garrett was not a dangerous man exactly, but he was pushy and accustomed to getting his way. Mrs. Lancaster, Garrett called out as he reined in his horse. He was a man in his late 40s, thick through the middle, with a florid face and eyes that never quite met yours directly. I heard you were still trying to work this place. Thought I would ride out and renew my offer. Mr. Garrett, I appreciate your interest, but as I said before, I am not interested in selling. Garrett's gaze moved to Quinn, and something like contempt crossed his face. I also heard you had taken on a hired man. Interesting choice for a widow in your position. My hired hand is none of your concern, Lily said coolly. Maybe not, but your welfare is a concern for the whole community. A woman alone, living with a strange man, trying to work a farm she cannot possibly manage. It reflects poorly on all of us. Garrett dismounted and his 2 companions followed suit. I am prepared to make you a very generous offer, Mrs. Lancaster. $300 for the land and buildings, plus I will personally ensure you have safe passage back to wherever you came from. The land is worth at least $600, and you know it, Quinn said, speaking for the first time. The wheat crop alone will bring in close to that if it comes in as good as it looks. Garrett's eyes narrowed. I do not recall asking for your opinion, Drifter. You are right, you did not ask, but I am giving it anyway. Mrs. Lancaster is not selling, so you can take yourself and your insulting offer and ride back to wherever you came from." For a moment, Lily thought Garrett might escalate things. His face darkened with anger, and his hand moved toward the gun at his hip. But then he seemed to reconsider, perhaps realizing that starting a fight on her property would not look good to Sheriff Morrison. "You are making a mistake, Mrs. Lancaster," Garrett said, swinging back into his saddle. "A woman in your position cannot afford to make enemies. You might find life gets considerably harder around here if you continue to refuse good advice." "Is that a threat?" Lily asked, her voice steady, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "It is a statement of fact. Things happen on farms, equipment breaks, animals get out, crops fail. Would be a shame if you found yourself facing those kinds of problems." Garrett tipped his hat mockingly. "You know where to find me when you come to your senses." He rode off with his men, leaving a cloud of dust hanging in the air. Lily realized she was shaking, anger and fear mixing together until she could not tell which was which. "He will not actually do anything," Quinn said, but he did not sound entirely convinced. "Men like that are all bluster." "Maybe, but maybe not." Lily looked at Quinn. "He could make things very difficult for us if he wanted to. Garrett has influence in town, connections. If he turns people against me, I might not be able to sell my wheat come harvest, no matter how good the crop is. Then we will deal with that if it happens. But Lily, you cannot give in to threats. Once you do that, people like Garrett will walk all over you for the rest of your life." Lily knew he was right, but that did not make the situation any less frightening. That night, she lay awake long after Quinn's breathing had evened out into sleep, staring at the dark ceiling and wondering if she was being brave or just stubborn. Was keeping this land really worth all the trouble it was causing? Or was she clinging to it out of pride, refusing to admit that maybe she could not do this after all? The next morning, she woke to find Quinn already outside, checking the perimeter of the property. When she asked him about it, he shrugged and said he just wanted to make sure nothing had been disturbed during the night. But Lily understood what he was really doing. He was standing guard, protecting her and what was hers, and the realization brought a lump to her throat. Over the following days, nothing obviously went wrong, but small things started happening. A section of fence was found damaged, though it could have been an accident. 3 chickens went missing, though that could have been a fox. The plow blade developed a crack that Quinn managed to repair, but it cost them half a day of work. "It might just be bad luck," Quinn said when Lily expressed her suspicions. "Farms have problems all the time." "You do not really believe that?" "No," he admitted, "but I do not have any proof it is Garrett either. And without proof, there is nothing we can do except stay vigilant and hope he gets bored and moves on to harassing someone else." But Garrett did not get bored. 2 weeks after his visit, Lily rode into town for supplies and found that Mr. Pearson seemed uncomfortable serving her. When she pressed him, he admitted that Garrett had been spreading rumors, suggesting that Lily's arrangement with Quinn was improper, that she was living in sin, that her presence was a corrupting influence on the decent women of the community. "I do not believe a word of it, Mrs. Lancaster," Mr. Pearson said quickly. "Neither does my wife. But some folks are listening, and I would be lying if I said it was not affecting your standing in town." Lily felt like she had been punched in the stomach. She gathered her supplies with as much dignity as she could muster and left before the tears could start. On the ride back to the homestead, she let herself cry, great shaking sobs that scared the horse and made her chest ache. Quinn was in the barn when she arrived, and he took one look at her face and set down his tools. "What happened?" Lily told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush. When she finished, Quinn was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight with barely suppressed anger. "I will leave," he said finally. "If my being here is causing you this much trouble, I will pack up and leave tonight. You can hire someone local, someone whose presence will not fuel gossip." "No," Lily said immediately, surprised by her own vehemence. "No, I do not want you to leave. I need you here, Quinn, not just for the work, but because you are the only person who has treated me like I have a brain in my head and a right to make my own choices. Lily, if I stay, it is only going to get worse. Garrett is not going to stop until he gets what he wants. Then let him try. I am done caring what people think. I am done trying to fit into their narrow definition of appropriate behavior. You said it yourself. I should do what feels right to me. And what feels right is keeping my land and keeping you here to help me work it. Lily stepped closer to Quinn, close enough to see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. Unless you want to leave, if you are tired of dealing with all this drama, I would understand. I do not want to leave, Quinn said quietly. I have not wanted to leave since about the second day I was here. But Lily, you need to understand something. People are not wrong to gossip. Not entirely. What do you mean? Quinn took a deep breath, and when he spoke, his voice was raw with honesty. I mean that I have feelings for you, feelings that go beyond respect or friendship. I have been trying to ignore them, trying to keep things professional, but it is getting harder every day. The way you laugh at my terrible harmonica playing, the way you stand up to men like Garrett even though you are terrified, the way you look in the morning with your hair down and the sun coming through the window. He stopped, shaking his head. I know it is too soon. I know you are still grieving Thomas. But you asked me not to leave, and I need you to know why staying is so hard for me. Lily's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst through her ribs. She opened her mouth, closed it, had no idea what to say. Part of her wanted to retreat, to remind Quinn of all the reasons this was impossible, but another part of her, a part that had been growing stronger over the past weeks, wanted something different entirely. I think about you too, she whispered. More than I should. I feel guilty about it every single day, like I am betraying Thomas by having these feelings. But then I remember what you said about being allowed to feel things, about being alive, meaning feeling all kinds of contradictory emotions. And I wonder if maybe it is okay to grieve Thomas and still be drawn to you. Maybe one does not cancel out the other. Quinn reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on her cheek, and Lily leaned into the touch without thinking about it. I do not want to rush you, Quinn said. I do not want you to do anything you are not ready for. But I also cannot pretend I do not feel what I feel. So what do? We keep going, Lily said. We finish the growing season, we bring in the harvest, and we see what happens. No promises, no expectations, just honest work and honest feelings, and seeing where that leads us. I can do that, Quinn agreed. They stood there in the barn, the smell of hay and horses all around them, and Lily felt something shift in her chest. It was not the end of her grief. She would always carry Thomas with her, would always love him in some way. But maybe there was room for something new too, something unexpected and precious that had grown up in the shadow of her loss. The wheat continued to grow, turning from pale green to deeper shades as summer progressed. Lily and Quinn worked side by side, tending the crop, and slowly the nature of their relationship shifted. They were more open with each other now, more willing to share their thoughts and fears. Quinn told her about his childhood, about losing his mother and then his father to drink, about years spent drifting because he had never found a place that felt like home. Lily told him about the loneliness of her childhood, with her aunt, about the joy of finding Thomas, about the terror of watching him die, and knowing she could not save him. They did not kiss or do anything that could be considered improper, but there was an intimacy in their conversations that went deeper than physical touch. They were learning each other, discovering the shape of each other's souls, and Lily found herself falling in a way that was different from how she had fallen for Thomas, but no less real. In mid-July, disaster struck. Lily woke one morning to find that something had gotten into the wheat field during the night and trampled a significant section. The damage was deliberate, a swath of destruction cut right through the center of their crop. Quinn examined the scene with a grim expression. Someone did this on purpose. The pattern is too regular to be animals. They rode through here, maybe dragging something behind them to flatten the plants. Garrett, Lily said, her voice hollow. Probably. But again, we cannot prove it. Quinn straightened, his jaw set. We need to talk to Sheriff Morrison. This has gone too far. They rode into town together, and Sheriff Morrison listened to their story with a deepening frown. When they finished, he sighed and leaned back in his chair. I believe you, Mrs. Lancaster, and I have had my suspicions about Garrett for a while now, but without proof or witnesses, there is not much I can do. I can ride out to his ranch and ask him some questions, but he will just deny everything. So he is going to get away with this? Lily asked, disbelief and anger warring in her voice. Not if I can help it. I will increase patrols in your area, and I will make it very clear to Garrett that I am watching him. But you two need to be careful. A man like Garrett, when he feels cornered, can become dangerous. The sheriff looked at Quinn. You keeping an eye on things out there? Best I can, Sheriff, but I cannot watch everything all the time, especially when we are working the fields. Maybe it is time to ask for help from your neighbors, the sheriff suggested. I know some folks have been listening to Garrett's gossip, but there are plenty of decent people around here who would not stand for this kind of harassment, regardless of how they feel about your living arrangements. It was a good idea, but Lily had no idea who she could ask. Most of her neighbors had been standoffish since Thomas died, and some had openly sided with the gossips. But that evening, as she and Quinn were eating a quiet supper, there was a knock at the door. Lily opened it to find Samuel Henderson standing on her porch, hat in hand, looking uncomfortable. He was Mrs. Henderson's son, a man in his early 30s who farmed land about 2 miles north of her property. Mr. Henderson, Lily said, unable to keep the surprise from her voice. What can I do for you? Mrs. Lancaster, I heard about what happened to your wheat field. I also heard the sheriff asking around town for people willing to help keep an eye on your place. Samuel shifted his weight. My mother and sister might have some unkind things to say about you, but my father raised me to believe that a man helps his neighbors when they are in trouble. I would be willing to ride out here a few times a week, just to check on things. Lily felt tears prick her eyes. That is very kind of you, Mr. Henderson. Not kind, just decent. And madam, for what it is worth, I do not think you are doing anything wrong. A woman has a right to keep her property and hire who she wants. Some people are just afraid of anything that does not fit their narrow view of how the world should work. He nodded to Quinn. Mr. Ingram, good evening. Mr. Henderson, Quinn replied, coming to stand beside Lily. We appreciate the help. Samuel left after arranging a schedule for his patrols, and over the next few days other neighbors came forward as well. Not many, but enough. The Johnsons from the next property over, the Mitchells from town who had always liked Thomas, even old Mr. Sykes, who claimed he was too cantankerous to care about gossip, but too nosy not to help keep watch. With people checking on the property regularly, the incident stopped. Whether Garrett had been warned off by the increased attention or simply decided to bide his time, Lily did not know. But the wheat was able to grow undisturbed through the rest of July and into August, ripening under the hot sun until the fields were a sea of gold. Harvest time arrived, and Quinn hired 3 men from town to help with the cutting and threshing. Lily worked alongside them from dawn to dusk, binding sheaves and hauling them to the threshing area. It was brutal work, the sun beating down mercilessly, sweat soaking through their clothes, chaff getting into every exposed bit of skin and making them itch. But it was also glorious, the culmination of months of hard work and worry. When the last of the wheat was cut and threshed and loaded into sacks for transport to the grain elevator in Salt Lake City, Quinn did the calculations and presented them to Lily. After paying the hired help and accounting for the damaged section, you should clear about $400 from this harvest, more than enough to cover your costs for the year and have some left over. $400. It was not a fortune, but it was enough. Enough to prove she could do this. Enough to make it through the winter and plant again next spring. enough to start rebuilding her life on her own terms. Lily sat down on the porch steps and put her face in her hands, and this time when the tears came, they were tears of relief and triumph. Quinn sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. You did it! Against all odds, against everyone who said you could not, you did it. We did it, Lily corrected. I could not have managed any of this without you, Quinn. Maybe, but it was your strength that kept you going, your determination. I just helped with the heavy lifting. They sat in silence for a while, watching as the sun sank toward the mountains. The hired men had left, paid and satisfied with their work. The fields lay empty now, stubble remaining where golden wheat had stood. In a few weeks, the stubble would be plowed under, and the cycle would begin again. But for now, there was this moment of completion, of having faced an impossible challenge and emerged victorious. What happens now? Lily asked quietly. I suppose that depends on what you want to happen. Lily turned to look at Quinn, really look at him. His face was sunburned and lined with exhaustion, his hands rough and scarred from months of hard work. But his eyes were steady and kind, and when he looked at her, she saw everything she needed to know, written in his expression. I want you to stay, she said, not as hired help, but as a partner. Equal shares in the farm, equal say in how things are run. I want to build something with you, the way I was building something with Thomas. I am not trying to replace him. I could never do that. But I think maybe there is room in my heart for loving someone new. Quinn's breath caught. Lily, are you sure? It has only been 7 months since Thomas died. People will talk even more than they already do. Let them talk. I am done living my life according to other people's rules. Lily reached out and took Quinn's hand, lacing her fingers through his. I know what I feel. I know that when I wake up in the morning, the first thing I think about is whether you are already up or if I will see you coming in from checking on the horses. I know that when something happens during the day, good or bad, I want to tell you about it. I know that when I imagine next year's planting, I see us working side by side. Maybe it is too soon by conventional standards, but maybe we should make our own standards. Quinn lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made Lily's heart ache. I love you. I think I have loved you since the day I rode up and found you wearing your husband's coat and refusing to apologize for it. You are the strongest, most stubborn, most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I would be honored to be your partner in every sense of the word. Then we are agreed. Lily smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes for the first time in months. We can face down gossip and harassment and bad weather and crop failures as long as we face them together. They sealed the agreement with a kiss, tentative at first but deepening as months of restrained feelings finally found release. When they pulled apart, both of them were breathless and grinning like fools. The next morning, they rode into town together and stopped at the county clerk's office to file paperwork, making Quinn an equal owner of the property. Then they visited Sheriff Morrison to inform him of their intentions to marry as soon as a proper waiting period had passed. The sheriff congratulated them with genuine warmth, though he warned them that the gossip would likely get worse before it got better. He was right. When word spread through Taylorsville that Lily Lancaster was planning to marry her hired hand less than 8 months after her first husband's death, the reaction was swift and harsh. Mrs. Henderson declared it a disgrace and refused to speak to Lily in public. Several of the more conservative church members suggested that Lily was disrespecting Thomas's memory. There were whispers that the relationship must have started before Thomas died, that perhaps Quinn had been in the picture all along. But there were also people who supported them. Mr. and Mrs. Pearson hosted a small engagement dinner at their home, inviting the neighbors who had helped watch over the property. Samuel Henderson defied his mother by attending and offering a toast to the couple's happiness. Even some of the women who had been coldest to Lily began to soften, perhaps recognizing that life was hard enough in the Utah Territory without making it harder for someone trying to build a life from the ashes of loss. They were married in October of 1883, a simple ceremony at the county courthouse with Sheriff Morrison standing as witness. Lily wore her blue calico dress, and Quinn wore his best shirt and a new vest he had bought special for the occasion. There were no flowers, no fancy reception, no crowd of well-wishers. But when the judge pronounced them husband and wife, and Quinn kissed her with so much tenderness she thought her heart might burst, Lily felt a completeness she had not thought she would ever feel again. The first year of their marriage was not easy. They faced another winter, though this one was less desperate than the last. They planted wheat again in the spring of 1884, and this time the work felt less daunting because they were truly working as a team. Quinn had ideas about crop rotation and adding some cattle to diversify their income, and Lily was more than willing to try new approaches. The gossip gradually died down as people found new scandals to occupy their attention. Lily and Quinn became simply another farm couple in the area, remarkable only in that they seemed genuinely happy despite the hardships of frontier life. In the summer of 1884, Lily discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complicated mixture of emotions. Joy at the idea of bringing new life into the world with Quinn, fear that something would go wrong, and a strange, bittersweet sadness that Thomas would never meet this child, never know that the land he had worked so hard to claim was still in the family. Quinn seemed to understand without her having to explain. "It is all right to feel conflicted," he told her one evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "This baby is ours, but Thomas will always be part of your story. We can honor that." "How?" Lily asked. "We can tell our children about him, about how he was brave enough to come west with you, how he built this cabin with his own hands, how he loved this land. He can be part of the family history, not something we pretend never happened." Lily rested her head on Quinn's shoulder, overwhelmed with love for this man who understood her so completely. "What did I do to deserve you? You wore your dead husband's coat to keep from freezing and did not give a damn what anyone thought about it," Quinn said with a smile. "That is what caught my attention. The rest was just me being smart enough to recognize an extraordinary woman when I found one." Their first child, a son, was born in February of 1885. They named him Thomas Samuel, honoring both Lily's first husband and the neighbor who had stood by them when others turned away. He was a healthy baby with Quinn's gray-blue eyes and Lily's blonde hair, and from the moment she held him, Lily felt a fierce protective love that bordered on terrifying. Quinn was a natural father, patient and gentle with the baby, even when Thomas Samuel was screaming at 2 in the morning. He built a cradle that rocked smoothly, fashioned toys from scraps of wood, and sang lullabies in his rough, untrained voice that somehow soothed the baby better than anything else. As Thomas Samuel grew from infant to toddler, the farm prospered. The wheat harvests were good, and they added a small herd of cattle that provided additional income. They were able to make improvements to the property: a larger barn, a proper well, a vegetable garden that could actually feed them through the winter. The homestead that had once felt like a burden became a true home, filled with laughter and life. In 1887, Lily gave birth to a daughter they named Grace Elizabeth. She had Quinn's dark hair and Lily's blue eyes, and she was stubborn from the day she was born, refusing to sleep at night and demanding attention with lung power that seemed impossible for such a tiny body. "She reminds me of you," Quinn said one exhausted morning after Grace had kept them up most of the night. "Determined to do things her own way and not caring who knows it." "I was never that loud," Lily protested, but she was smiling. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family and the slow accumulation of small joys. Thomas Samuel learned to walk and then to run, exploring every corner of the property with fearless enthusiasm. Grace grew from a demanding infant into a curious toddler who wanted to know the name of everything she saw. Quinn taught Thomas Samuel how to gentle a horse, and Lily taught Grace the names of all the wildflowers that grew in the foothills. The town's attitude toward them had shifted completely. Lily and Quinn were now seen as a successful farm family, an example of what hard work and determination could accomplish. The fact that their relationship had started under scandalous circumstances was largely forgotten, or at least not discussed in polite company. Mrs. Henderson even grudgingly admitted at a church social that Lily seemed to have made the best of a difficult situation, which was as close to approval as that woman was likely to get. Robert Garrett had left the area in 1885, selling his ranch and moving to California. Rumor had it that he had gotten involved in some shady land deals and decided to leave before the law caught up with him. Lily felt only relief at his departure. Without his poisonous influence, the community had been able to see her and Quinn for who they really were, decent people trying to build a life. In 1889, 6 years after that first day when Quinn had ridden up to her homestead looking for work, Lily stood at the edge of their wheat field with Thomas Samuel balanced on one hip and Grace holding her hand. Quinn walked toward them from the barn, his gait steady and sure, and when he reached them, he scooped Grace up with one arm and pulled Lily close with the other. "Look at that wheat," he said, nodding toward the field. "Best crop we have had yet. We are going to clear $600 this year, maybe more." "Enough to add that room onto the cabin," Lily said. "The children are getting too big to share our space much longer. Enough for lots of things, maybe even enough to take a trip to Salt Lake City, stay in a real hotel for a night, go to a restaurant where someone else does the cooking." Lily laughed at the thought. "That sounds absolutely decadent." "You deserve decadent. You deserve everything good in the world, Lily Ingram." Quinn kissed her forehead, then each of the children's heads in turn. "We all do." Thomas Samuel wiggled to be put down and immediately ran off toward the chicken coop, Grace squirming to follow him. Quinn and Lily let them go, keeping a watchful eye, but allowing them the freedom to explore. They stood together in the golden afternoon light, Quinn's arm around Lily's waist, both of them looking out over the land they had fought so hard to keep. "Do you ever think about how things might have been different?" Lily asked quietly. "If I had sold the land that first year, if you had never stopped looking for work here." "All the time," Quinn admitted. "But I cannot imagine my life any other way now. This place, you, the children. This is where I was always meant to end up. I just had to take the long way around to get here." "I am glad you did," Lily said. "I am glad you were brave enough to offer help to a woman everyone else had written off. I am glad you told me I could wear whatever keeps me warm and do whatever feels right to me. Those were just words. You were the one brave enough to live by them." They stood together as the sun sank lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. Inside the cabin that Thomas had built and Quinn had improved, and their children now filled with laughter, supper waited to be cooked. The horses needed feeding, the chickens needed to be shut up for the night, and 100 other small tasks waited for attention. But for this moment, they just stood and watched the light change, grateful for the life they had built against all odds. Years continued to pass, measured in harvests and birthdays, and the slow accumulation of small miracles. In 1891, Lily gave birth to twin boys, James and Jacob, who were identical in appearance but opposite in temperament. James was cautious and thoughtful, while Jacob was impulsive and adventurous. Quinn built a bigger table to fit their growing family and added 2 more rooms to the cabin until it was hardly recognizable from the simple structure Thomas had built a decade earlier. Thomas Samuel grew into a capable young man who loved the land as much as his parents did. Grace developed a talent for working with horses that surpassed even Quinn's abilities. The twins were still young, but already showing signs of the men they would become. The farm continued to prosper, allowing Quinn and Lily to help other struggling farmers in the area when times were hard. They remembered what it was like to face impossible odds with no one willing to offer assistance, and they were determined to be the kind of neighbors they had needed when they were fighting to survive. In the spring of 1895, 12 years after that cold March day when Lily had first worn Thomas's coat into town and faced down the judgment of her neighbors, she stood at the cemetery on the hill overlooking Taylorsville. She had not visited Thomas's grave in years, guilt and grief having kept her away, but she felt drawn there now. The headstone was simple: Thomas Lancaster, beloved husband, 1856, 1882. Lily stood before it with wildflowers in her hands, the same kind that had grown wild in the fields during their first spring together. "I'm sorry I have not come before now," she said softly, laying the flowers at the base of the stone. "I think I was afraid you would be angry with me or disappointed. I remarried Thomas. I have 4 children now, and I am happier than I have any right to be. But I want you to know that I have never forgotten you. I have never stopped being grateful for the years we had together, for the home you built, for the dreams you gave me permission to have." She paused, surprised to find tears on her cheeks. "Quinn tells the children about you, about how brave you were, how hard you worked. Thomas Samuel knows he is named after you, and he is so proud of that. This family that I have built, this life I am living, it is only possible because you gave me a foundation to build from. So thank you, Thomas. Thank you for loving me. Thank you for bringing me west, and thank you for making me believe I could be strong enough to survive anything." Lily stood there a while longer, letting the spring breeze dry her tears, feeling a sense of peace she had not known she needed. When she finally turned to leave, she found Quinn waiting at a respectful distance, giving her privacy but making sure she knew he was there. "I thought you might need company for the walk back," he said simply. Lily took his hand, lacing their fingers together the way she had on that first day when they had agreed to build a life together. "I always need your company. That is never going to change." They walked back toward the homestead together, past fields where wheat was already sprouting green, past the barn where their horses waited, past the cabin where their children were probably getting into some kind of trouble. It was an ordinary spring day in Taylorsville, Utah, unremarkable except for the fact that Lily Lancaster Ingram had finally made peace with all the different pieces of herself. She had been a woman shunned for wearing her dead husband's clothes, and a cowboy had told her to wear whatever keeps her warm. That simple act of acceptance had changed everything, had given her permission to stop trying to fit herself into shapes that did not match who she was. And from that permission had grown a love that was different from what she had known before, but no less precious, a life that was built on honesty and hard work and the refusal to let other people's judgments define her worth. As they crested the small rise and the homestead came into view, Lily could see Thomas Samuel teaching the twins how to feed the chickens while Grace checked the horses' hooves with the focused concentration of someone who took her work seriously. Smoke rose from the chimney, and the fields stretched golden green toward the mountains. "This is everything I never knew I needed," Lily said. Quinn squeezed her hand. "Then we did something right." They walked down toward home together, two people who had found each other when they needed it most, who had built something beautiful from the ashes of loss and the courage to live authentically. Behind them, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging. Ahead of them, their children waited with all the chaos and joy that comes from a family built on love. And above them, the Utah sky stretched endless and blue, holding space for all the different ways a person can survive and thrive and find their way home.